Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Barry Price. I'm the president of the Hemlock Society of San Diego, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Hemlock Societies of San Diego's July 2023 meeting, where we will have an opportunity to learn about the work of the Final Exit Network, which I think you'll agree is one of the most important organizations in the right to die landscape. We hope you will find today's program helpful, particularly in helping you understand better your end-of-life options. If you do find today's program helpful, and we're pretty sure you will, we hope you will support the ongoing work of the Hemlock Society of San Diego. You can do that by going to our website, hemlocksocietysandiego.org. There you can either donate to the society, or if you're not a member, you should consider joining. You can be a member for the reasonable fee of $35 a year. Also, at that website, I think you'll see there's a plethora of information that helps you expand your understanding of right to die issues, end of life issues. It's a veritable goldmine of information. We record all the meetings, or nearly all the meetings that we have, monthly meetings that we have, and those recordings are all accessible on that website. You can also see any notices of upcoming programs that we're sponsoring, and you can also read innumerable articles on right to die issues that are things happening around the world, as well as things happening here in the US, in our state and other states as well. So it's an incredibly rich source of information. Hopefully you'll take advantage of that. Well, I don't want to spend any more time touting our website or our organization. I think it's time to pass the mic on to Faye Girsh, our founder of the Hemlock Society of San Diego, who's going to tell you about the Final Exit Network a little bit, and then introduce our participants to you. So without further ado, Faye, take it away.
Thanks, Barry. I hope my share screen works, because as all these movements occur, we think they just sprung out of nothing. And what we have in America is not a long history, but a history of right to die movements, starting with the Hemlock Society with Derek Humphrey. So I've just made sort of a chronology of them. Let's see if I can make this happen. And in doing this, I realized that this era that we live in is maybe not as exciting as the 80s and especially the 90s. So I just want to tell you, the 90s is where Final Exit Network was born out of. So let me just tell you some of the things that happened. Of course, in 1980, the Hemlock Society was born, founded by Derek Humphrey. And surprisingly, although that's not news to us, it is news to many people. Sometimes I get the credit for it, but I do not deserve it. Derek Humphrey is the founder of the Hemlock Society. And we're going to pay tribute to him at the luncheon we talked about, because he may be on his way out soon. When the National Hemlock Society had many chapters, and in 1987, we formed the Hemlock Society of San Diego, which is now the only autonomous hemlock group. But here's where 1990 comes in, which is very interesting to me, and especially because I lived through it. Derek and I were at a meeting in the Netherlands when we saw on the screen that Jack Kevorkian, whoever he was, we knew he was a pathologist. He helped Janet Atkins, a woman who had early dementia, die. And it was on the national television in the Netherlands. And we were quite astonished by that and sort of applauding, even though we didn't know who he was or what he was doing or whether it would continue. And then in 1991, Derek did a remarkable thing. He published the book, the first edition, by the way, Final Exit, which is a manual of self-deliverance for the terminally ill, although anybody could buy it in any bookstore and online. And that has been a Bible for people who want to help themselves die by self-deliverance. And now in its third edition, and also there's a digital edition available on the Ergo website. When 1987, when we started our chapter in 1988, actually Derek said, let's have a ballot initiative to legalize aid in dying in California. And that had never been done before. And that attracted a lot of attention internationally and nationally. And we were out there with our ironing boards and our petitions and everything. But we had to abort it because we didn't have enough money to do it that year. We did do it later and still not successful. But anyway, we do have a law in California. But in 1994, the law did pass. The Death with Dignity law did pass in Oregon. That was a first in this country. But in 1996, that was a very important year. Bob Dent was a Buddhist man with terminal prostate cancer who died under the first law in the world in Oregon and in Australia. It was called the Right of the Terminally Ill Act, ROTI it was called. It was passed by Marshall Perrin, who was then Prime Minister of the territory of Northern Territory. The first doctor who performed the law actually euthanasia, lethal injection, was Philip Nitschke, from whom we still hear. And the Prime Minister of the Northern Territory was Marshall Perrin, and we still hear from him. He's very active in Australia. The other thing that happened in 1996, which was really historical, was our fellow group, Compassion in Dying, Catherine Tucker, the lawyer for Compassion in Dying, took a case to the California courts of the Ninth Circuit District and the Second Circuit in New York, Bacco versus Quill, challenging the laws against assisted dying for doctors to do it. And they won the case. In those two circuits, which are the two largest circuits in the country, it was ruled that aid in dying was a constitutional right. I had just become head of the National Hemlock Society, and I was so excited, and we were all so excited in the movement because this would have been a really step forward for the United States to say there was a constitutional right to aid in dying. But in 1997, the rulings were appealed to the United States Supreme Court. I was at that hearing. And that was in January. And in July, we got a 9-1 decision saying, no, there is not a constitutional right. It would be up to each state to decide. I personally felt that was a blow. We had tried ballot initiatives. We had spent a lot of money doing all the legal things, taken this up to court. And then it was overruled, and we had to go state by state, and who knows how long that would take. So in 1997, the Oregon law went into effect, and that was good. That was the first state to do that. But how long would it be before every state did it? And how long would it be before doctors agreed to do it? And was medical aid in dying the only way that people could get help in dying? At that time, after Derek published Final Exit Network, when people would call us, which was all the time, and say, we are desperate, we want to die, we would be able to say, well, read Final Exit and call us in the morning. Read Final Exit, and that tells you how to do it, which was fine if you could read Final Exit and do it that way. But if you couldn't, if you were too sick or too alone or too blind or whatever, that was not the solution for you. And a medical solution was very unlikely to pass nationwide at any time soon. So we tried to figure out what we could do in the Hemlock Society to have the law have something available to people. And we developed the Caring Friends program. That I'm saying that with emphasis because that is the precursor of Final Exit Network. We decided we could train we talked to a lot of lawyers. Our lawyers said, don't even think about doing this, but we found a lawyer who understood what we were trying to do. And he said, if you don't do two things, if you don't provide the means to a person and you don't physically provide help, then you're not doing assisted suicide, and that's legal. And Derek always maintained that a lot of our activities were covered by the First Amendment. So we trained the first class of Caring Friends volunteers, 28 people who would go anywhere in the country at no charge and talk to people about their situation, explain to people what we had available, which was essentially the breathing of inert gas. And no doctors were involved and no medications were involved. And they decided whether they want to do that. And if they wanted to do that, we would send our team of 2 Caring Friends volunteers back to their homes and be with them when they chose to use the inert gas method. But we would not help them at all. They would have to completely do it themselves. So it was sort of a do-it-yourself with guidance method. At that time, our board, for some reason, which is not too clear to me, even though I was CEO of the organization, decided to change our name from Hemlock to Choice in Dying, and also to merge with the other organization I mentioned before, Compassion in Dying, which was a very small, about a third of the side of the organization. And in 2004, Compassion and Choices was born. Compassion and Choices maintains that it is the longest lived organization, right to die organization in the country, which is not true. It was started in 2004 as from the rib of the Hemlock Society. But also, Final Exit Network was born from our Caring Friends program. And when the Hemlock Society, National Hemlock Society disappeared at that time, and these 2 organizations were formed. And that was because a lot of our chapter leaders and our Caring Friends people not want us to go away. They wanted us to continue at least the Caring Friends program. And that is how Final Exit Network was born. And that's what I wanted you to know about. So today we have 2 important members of the Final Exit Network with us who were not necessarily there at the beginning, and even they may not even know the history of this. I want to introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce Brian and Lowrey, who will introduce themselves a little further. Brian had mathematics background, worked for the CIA for 5 years, was a Santa Claus in Macy's department store, did a lot of interesting things. Also worked for Compassion and Choices before he became a volunteer for Final Exit Network. And Brian, would you introduce yourself? And I'm going to leave this totally up to you from now on.
Before I introduce myself, I don't know that you need to know any more about me other than I'm president and I'm a senior guide trained in 2016. I want to start by, first of all, just thanking Barry and Faye for giving us this opportunity to talk to this group. I just wish that there were more groups around the country like this who are willing to talk about death and dying. I think we'd all be better off for that. And I'd like to personally, Faye, thank you for all of your energies in starting Final Exit. Because of your work, hundreds of people have avoided suffering and pain and had a peaceful death. And hopefully we'll have hundreds and thousands more in the future. So thank you for that. What we're going to do today, we're going to break this presentation into 2 parts. In the first part, I'll spend 5 or 10 minutes and just give you a quick update on the organization. And then Lowrey will tell you all about the guide program. So what I'd like to do is start by saying that I believe Final Exit Network is in the best shape that it's ever been in since its inception in 2004. We have a number of really well-trained senior guides and a program to develop new senior guides. And on the financial side, because of generous bequests from many of our members and supporters, we're in a financial position that will allow us to continue to provide our services free for the indefinite future. Final Exit Network is a virtual 501c3 nonprofit with 3 paid employees, about 75 volunteers, about 1,500 to 2,000 members and supporters. We're a virtual organization. We do not have any offices. We use consultants to help us with communications, fundraising, and technical issues. We recently received the Platinum Award from Candid, which is a nonprofit watchdog that focuses more on transparency. And we think this is a really wonderful award for us, and it should let everyone know that we've been working hard to get to this level. So the mission of Final Exit Network, Lowrey, the next slide. The mission of Final Exit Network has not changed much since its inception 19 plus years ago. Our mission is to educate qualified individuals in practical, peaceful ways to end their life, offer them compassionate presence, and defend their right to choose. As Faye said, we do not encourage, we do not assist, we do not provide the means. Everything we do is legal, safe, effective, and efficient. But just like our mission hasn't changed much over the last 20 years, the problems facing our organization haven't changed much either. And there are 2 primary issues that we're trying to deal with. The first is to find more ways to let people know about us so they can use our services. And the second is to try to convince people that what we do is legal and that we're a very professional organization. And so over the last number of years, we have developed a set of new services and programs to address those 2 issues. And I want to just quickly tell you about some of those issues. So as some of you may know, a few years ago, we started something we called the Special Advance Directive for Dementia, which was an attempt to let people specify that after they lost competency, they wanted to die by stopping eating and drinking. And we offered to provide legal support if that advance directive was challenged. We've since updated that so that we will now support any valid advance directive for dementia that's out there. We think this is a very, very important legal precedent that we'd like to be involved in. We also started a surrogate program. We hired a specialist to help our members and supporters answer any questions about advance directives, and also to make sure that they understood how important it was that you have a very strong advocate for you in your advance directive if you want it to be enforced. We just recently started the Chosen Death Forum, which allows people to get together and talk about their feelings about death and dying, like-minded people. It's based on the Death Cafe model, which has been around for 15 or 20 years. And so far, it's been quite successful. We found in the past that our coordinators, a lot of people wanted to know as they came in to start thinking about hastening their death, how other people felt about it. And this is addressing that. We trained a set of doulas to be able to support people who wanted to die from VSED. That was quite successful. We developed a training course for lawyers who practice elder law. And in fact, the presentation that we gave allowed them to get a credit that they have to get on an annual basis. So we've done that to reach out to them. As some of you know, we've just started this year providing workshops to our members and their friends. We had one in San Diego, in which we got out to get into the details of how we work and in fact how the nitrogen method works, and that's been pretty successful, and we hope to continue that. We've upgraded our speakers bureau. We talked to over 2,000 people last year about Final Exit Network, and we hope to make progress on that this year. The last thing that we're doing in these services is we've just been in the process of finalizing our service to help people get to Pegasus in Switzerland. We had a long-standing member and a good friend of mine who went to Pegasus in June to die, and she introduced us to Rudy, and as a result, we currently have two clients who were qualified for our services who have chosen to go to Switzerland because they think it'll be a better option for them. And as we go forward, we think that many of our members may find that if they have help filling out these applications and getting the answers to their questions, that they might find either Pegasus or Dignitas to be better solutions than the nitrogen method for some people. So we're excited about that. Two other things I wanted to mention. We did some research a while ago, a couple of years ago. Bob Blake, who is a senior guide, one of our longest serving senior guides and a member of our medical evaluation committee, did some research. He looked at people who had been approved for final exit services to find out more information about them and why they were choosing to hasten their death. A couple of things that he learned. First of all, that the people who apply to us are very highly educated, more so than even those highly educated people who are using the MAID law. Two of the things that he found in his research, the first was that the number one reason people decided to use our services is there were no longer any medical solutions for their particular disease. The second one was most interesting to me is that they were afraid of ending up in a nursing home. And those of us that have been senior guides for a long time have heard this a lot. But probably the most important thing about Bob's research is that he wrote up the paper and he ended up getting it to be peer reviewed and published in the Omega Journal of Death and Dying. And if you're interested in looking at that, you can find that on our website under news and events. But that's getting our name out into the academic world, and it's showing that we're a very professional organization and we can do things, that other organizations are doing too. So the other thing we're doing, we have a very deep interest in dementia. We're the only organization that will actually work with people with dementia. And so we're interested in that. And we recently made application to the Next 50 Foundation to study how people with early stage dementia feel about hastening their death. We think this will allow us to participate in a national discussion around how people with dementia feel about this, and maybe to inspire some legislators to think about including dementia as a part of the current MAID laws. At any rate, I think you can see that we're trying to do a lot of things that will help people see that we're a professional organization, that we are a set of well-trained people, and that to try to do some things that will allow people to identify with us other than just wanting to hasten our death. So I'm very pleased with all those things. And before I turn this over to Lowrey, I just want to quickly review. Some people don't understand this, but all of our senior guides go through a training which they spend 2.5 days in person working with Lowrey and a set of other senior guides to be trained. And in order for them to become a senior guide, they have to be present at 5 exits with 2 to 3 different senior guides, which can take 12 to 18 months. So our senior guides are very, very qualified, a lot of experience, and are able to provide our clients with a very good service. So, and a lot of that is due to the fact that Lowrey took this over a few years ago and has done a great job in developing our training program and our handbook. And with that, Lowrey, I will turn over the presentation to you to talk about our guide program.
Great. Oh, thanks, Brian. So it is great to be with Hemlock again. Hemlock of San Diego is such an active and forward-leaning right to die organization that we obviously really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. So I'm going to second Brian in saying thank you for having us. As Brian mentioned, I manage the Final Exit Network Exit Guide Program. And I want to take maybe 20 minutes or so to introduce and explain the Exit Guide Program, who we serve, and what our process looks like. We have found that even people who have been Final Exit Network members for many years often have only a murky sense of what the guide program does and how it operates. As Brian described, Final Exit Network is a grassroots organization and really promoting access to choice in dying. And we're also working to normalize choice in dying so that it isn't such an uphill battle for those who want that choice, and so that it isn't such a rocky and really often stressful path for those who want to support a loved one in that choice. Before I dive into sort of the nitty-gritty of the guide program itself, I want to touch on legality a bit because I get asked about it quite a lot. Obviously, the Hemlock Society is a very well-educated audience, and I'm sure that you are all aware that it is perfectly legal for competent adults to decline any or all medical treatment, even if death will result. It is legal for competent adults to end their lives by voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. So dehydration is the cause of death. It is also legal to end your life by a method that is faster than voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, what would be suicide in legal parlance. So why isn't killing yourself by voluntarily stopping eating and drinking considered suicide? Beats me. I don't know. It seems that society has decided that if you choose to end your life in a slow, what might be miserable manner, that's fine. But if you choose to end your life in a fast and comfortable manner, that's suicide and needs to be stopped. But regardless of how society defines it, suicide, whether by voluntarily stopping eating and drinking or by a faster method, such as what we teach, is legal. It is also legal to know that somebody else is planning to end their life. In fact, it's legal to sit with them when they do. That is what our Exit Guide program does, and we make no secret about it. As Faye was discussing earlier, the legal advice that the Hemlock Society, when they were establishing Caring Friends way back, was just don't touch anything and don't provide anything, and you're not crossing any legal lines. So what is generally not legal, and there's a smorgasbord of different state laws on the matter, but what is generally not legal is to provide, as Faye was saying, assistance. Assistance is the legal word, and that is typically interpreted as physical assistance and or the provision of the means. That's pretty much across the country, except in the state of Minnesota, which has included speech under assistance. We think that law is unconstitutional, but we haven't gotten it to the Supreme Court as of yet. So essentially, Final Exit Network and what the guide program does is all captured under the umbrella of the First Amendment. All we provide is speech. So with that legal introduction, the Exit Guide program provides education on a safe, comfortable, and reliable method of self-deliverance. So we're currently teaching the use of inert gas or nitrogen. I did see a question about what's the nitrogen method. The nitrogen method is it's a method of self-deliverance that uses an inert gas to end one's life. So after educating our clients, if they decide to end their lives and they would like the exit guides to be with them, then the exit guides will sit with them when they exit. Obviously, for the reasons I just discussed, we do not provide any physical assistance and we do not provide the means. So who does the Exit Guide program serve? The Exit Guide program serves competent adults who are faced with intractable suffering from a medical condition, who wish to end their lives in the next 6 months to year. Now, we do appreciate that a lot of people want to be prepared ahead of time, and we think that's important too. So we have been developing, as Brian was talking about, we've been developing an in-person workshop program designed to meet that need. And we presented that workshop program in San Diego in early June. We've been hearing that there might be interest in having another in-person workshop in San Diego. And if Hemlock is able to host and can come up with 20 to 25 people who can commit to coming, we'd be happy to come back and do another workshop. We do require that workshop participants be 50 years of age or older, and that they not be planning to end their lives in the near future, because that's what the Exit Guide program is for. So coming back to the guide program, it is relationship intensive and resource intensive. So people really should wait to apply for guide support until they're really ready to exit in the near future. That said, applications for guide support are good for 3 years because we do understand that people's urgency to end their lives eases considerably when they know they have what they need and they don't feel trapped. We have found, and I often find from medical aid and dying practitioners as well, that there's an incredible peace of mind that comes from having control. People can get on with their lives when they don't feel helpless before pain and death. So it might seem counterintuitive, but we teach people to die so that they can live well while they still choose to. I want to dive a little bit deeper into what the criteria are for who the guide program supports specifically. But before I do that, I want to sort of clarify a distinction between medical aid and dying and Final Exit Network, which kind of circles back to the earlier discussion on legality. So medical aid and dying is affirmatively established by law in some states. Those laws specifically describe who qualifies, under what circumstances, and how medical aid and dying could be administered. A simple parallel might be like driving, right? States have laws that describe who can drive, when they can drive, and how they can drive. So in contrast to, say, medical aid in dying or driving, ending one's own life, suicide, is legal because there are no laws that say it is illegal. At the risk of perhaps being flippant, if you think of brewing a cup of tea, there's nothing in the law that says anything about you brewing yourself a cup of tea. Therefore, it is legal for you to do so, and it's up to you how you wish to brew your tea. If you're Captain Picard, that's Earl Grey and hot. But coming back to choosing to end one's own life, it's legal because it's in no statute does it say that it's illegal. And because freedom of speech is protected, the exit guides can teach people what they need to know in order to do it. But because what we do is not described in a law, the way medical aid in dying is, it's up to Final Exit Network to decide for ourselves sort of the details, the who, what, when, how we're going to serve. That's nice. It gives us a lot more control over who we serve. And it also means that our criteria are not set in stone and that we can adapt them with time, which we have done in the past. So thinking of our criteria, how we look at applicants and clients, there's sort of two umbrellas. We have general criteria and we have some medical criteria. The general criteria for folks who might want to work with the Exit Guide program are you must be a competent adult, you must have decisional capacity. You must be aware of your alternatives. Even if all that's left is palliative care in hospice, if you're going to end your life with Final Exit Network, then we want to know that you knew what other options you could have chosen. As discussed earlier, you must be physically able to procure, assemble, and operate the equipment without assistance. And I'll pause here slightly because this is something, at least for me, that really rankles. We are forced by the laws prohibiting assistance to be biased against those whose physical disabilities would prevent them from using the inert gas method. And that's really painful. We do get a number of calls from people who are clearly too physically weak that they wouldn't be able to do it. And we have to say, I'm sorry, we can't help you. It does create an underclass of people. So then our final criterion under the general criteria is that one's closest loved ones need to be aware of and not opposed to your choice to exit. We absolutely respect your autonomy, and we also respect your relationships, and we try to honor both. As you might imagine, these are not always easy bedfellows. On one hand, your life is absolutely your own. It doesn't belong to your spouse, your parents, your children. It certainly does not belong to your pastor or your politician. That is true. And it is also true that most of us are a part of a web, and the things that we do impact other people. You know, circling back to what Final Exit Network is trying to do is not only provide support for people today, but we also want to normalize choice in dying. And if we are leaving behind, if in our work we're leaving behind loved ones who are shocked and angry and suffering from complicated grief, that is not going to help move the societal ball forward to really help people understand what a well-chosen self-deliverance can actually look like. Your loved ones don't have to be thrilled with the idea. They just have to have a modicum of respect for it. So that then brings me to the medical criteria. And pardon, I feel like this is a bit of a data dump, but we have sort of 4 buckets of medical criteria. But for anybody who's coming from the outside, who's applying for Exit Guide support, you only need to meet one of them. We just think of them in these buckets because it affects how we approach the application. The first general bucket is the most obvious one, serious physical disease. These are what you would expect: cancers, neurodegenerative diseases, HIV. We often see applications for people with degenerative spine disease. It turns out that's a lot of pain later in life. So we do see a reasonable number of applications coming from that direction. The second bucket is severe treatment-resistant pain. These applications tend to be a little bit more difficult. This bucket tends to capture what I think of as diagnoses of elimination. So these are the diagnoses that you kind of circle around by eliminating other things. Things like chronic regional pain syndrome, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. Someone applying under the severe treatment-resistant pain category would need to demonstrate multiple attempts to diagnose and treat over time, which again is one of the reasons they're slightly more difficult applications, but we will consider them. Brian mentioned our particular interest in dementia, and we do accept applications from individuals who are in early stage dementia and still competent, but wish to end their lives before they lose competence. And that's a reasonable chunk of our applications. I want to say maybe 12% or so come from people suffering from dementia. And then finally, we will consider applications that are based on a constellation of conditions, where maybe any one of those conditions by itself wouldn't be enough to seriously impair quality of life, but you pool them all together and they really can have a serious impact on quality of life. This category tends to capture what I think used to be called old age rational suicide. I think now people are using the term completed life, but you can imagine if somebody is in advanced old age and their eyesight's not so good, so reading has become difficult, maybe even watching television is a little hard, hearing's not so good, so suddenly socializing is difficult, and your arthritis is killing you, so you can't move around and do anything. Right, you put those things together and the walls are really closing in. So we will consider applications for people with a constellation of conditions. We do not currently accept applications that are based on a mental health complaint. That does not mean if you have a mental health issue in your medical record that you can't apply. Half the country does have something in their medical record and the other half probably should. So the only problem is we can't have an application that is based on, that is driven by a mental health complaint. Okay, so having described our criteria, I want to do a quick piece about the guide process and what that sort of looks like, and then we'll get to questions. So because we have criteria, we do have an application process. It really is not a particularly arduous process, but we do ask that people write a personal statement that describes their conditions, how those conditions impact their quality of life, what their values are as they relate to end-of-life choice, and what it is they want from us. Then we ask that they submit medical records to substantiate, what it is they've told us in their personal statement. We have a questionnaire that's designed to elicit medical frailty and issues in that arena. Once we have all that paperwork, we have another volunteer who does sort of an informational interview with the applicant. Then that paperwork is put together and sent to our medical evaluation committee. They are tasked with reviewing the application primarily just for the medical criteria. And if they accept the application based on the medical criteria, then it would be up to the guides to evaluate the general criteria. So once somebody is accepted for guide support, they would start working with a guide. And this actually involves a lot of conversations. We're not death technicians. Like, we're not dropping in and knocking you off and leaving. That's not how we operate. And it turns out, that we operate and we live in a society that does not understand choice in dying. There's no social roadmap for choice in dying. There's no social rituals. Everybody kind of has to feel their way through this together and, reinvent the wheel each time. So the guides spend a lot of time talking with the client, talking with the loved ones, making sure the loved ones are comfortable with the decision, with the process, how this might work. We support our clients in really planning a responsible self-deliverance from soup to nuts. And nuts is obviously post-death, right? The client may be sort of done when they die, but there's people who have to come after. And so we want to make sure that's planned for as well. So the guides spend a lot of time working on the who, what, when, where, who's going to call the authorities, all of those things. Coming back to the guides' role, the guides educate, they support, they will help people plan. But at the end of the day, it is the client's journey, and the guides don't do anything. Sort of that's where we draw our lines. Once the guide is comfortable with all of the circumstances, then yes, we do get into nuts and bolts, and the guide will instruct the client on what equipment they need to get, how to get it. Once the equipment is in place, then 2 guides would typically come visit the client. Hopefully some loved ones would be present as well, and do an education visit, discuss things with the family as needed, educate the client on how to assemble and how to use the equipment. And as I mentioned, the method that we teach is the use of nitrogen, and the air that we breathe is 78.8% nitrogen. So we're breathing nitrogen all the time. Nitrogen is not going to hurt you. And so it's actually possible to do a full rehearsal. It's perfectly safe to inflate the hood, pull it down, take a couple of breaths of nitrogen, see what it feels like, and then take the hood off. And we have found that this is really amazingly powerful. I think, when I start talking to clients and especially to loved ones about tanks of gas and plastic bags, people's minds go nowhere good. And then once they see the rehearsal and they see that the bag is fully inflated, that the person is breathing comfortably in and out, everybody's shoulders relax. It like brings everybody back to earth. And I think a lot of the morbid imaginings are dispelled. So there's power in that, and that everybody gets comfortable. And it also is a point where the client can then take the equipment and stick it in the closet. They have what they need. They don't need the guides. They can call the guides back if they want, but they don't have to. And we definitely urge people to, hey, stick the tank in your closet and see how you feel. It's amazing how much better people feel when they don't feel trapped. Some percentage of our clients do decide they wish to go on to exit. And if and when they're ready, they can call us back, and the guides will come and be with them. So hopefully we've left enough time for questions. That's sort of a brief overview of how the guide program operates. And I guess I'll turn it back to Faye or whoever's going to run the questions.
Thank you, Larry. That was excellent. I think very clear, and people have their hands raised in chat. Who's doing chat? Janet?
Christy and I are.
Janet and I
yes.
are.
So the first question comes from John Hartley, and the question's for Lowrey. And he's just wondering, what size of tank do most people use?
Mm-hmm. So I think I saw in the chat that question was answered.
It was, but I think we'd like to hear from you in case everybody didn't read that.
Sure, no worries. So typically, you can use any size you want as long as it's 20 cubic feet or bigger, but 20 cubic feet is the typical. And having said that, we do try to be pretty careful about not providing technical information to people who haven't applied to the guide program, who are not in attendance. So if there's a whole lot more question about how to, we prefer not doing that in a wide audience that hasn't been screened and we don't know who's here. But we certainly direct people to Derek Humphrey's update of Final Exit. It's Final Exit 2020, and it's only a PDF download, but there's a link to it from our website. And chapter 22 has a really good description of the process and how it works.
So Lowrey, somebody was asking what the nitrogen method is. Is that your answer for them to get the response, or do you feel comfortable with your response to the nitrogen method? I think
I can talk a little bit about the nitrogen method in general. It's, as I said, it's a method of self-deliverance. I think people first maybe thought or noticed the idea that this could work from industrial accidents. It turns out that inert gases such as helium and nitrogen are really dangerous in industrial settings, because if there's a leak and a crawl space or a small enclosed space is filled, with an inert gas, and if a worker enters that space, they don't know that anything is wrong. It's just a quirk of evolution that, breathing in and out is a cycle. And as human beings evolved, the body only needed to track one spot on the breath cycle to make sure that you were breathing. And it just turns out that when the natural selection dice rolled, the spot on the breath cycle that the body tracks is the out breath. So as long as somebody is breathing out comfortably and exhaling their CO2, there's no alarm bell in the body for you're not getting oxygen. So the nitrogen method, you basically create a nitrogen environment around your head, and the body doesn't know that anything's wrong.
Thank you. So the next question comes from Julie Baudreau. And the question is, in light of the very real concerns about access gaps related to education and income, is there a fund for people who may not have the means to fly to Switzerland? If not, might you consider that as a donation fund to cultivate?
So at this point, we don't have a fund. We're talking with Rudy. They have, I think Pegasus does have some sort of a scholarship fund. I don't know the details of it. At this point, we're just beginning our relationship. I would hope that if this turns out to be something that our members and supporters want, that we would actually be able to go out and maybe even ask for donations to create a fund. But it's still too early to think about that. Right now, we're just trying to make sure that we have enough information that we can help members and supporters understand how to get there. So at this time, no, but it's something we certainly will look into.
Brian, under what circumstances would a person prefer to go to Switzerland rather than use the nitrogen method?
So Laura, do you want to talk about your one client, or do you want to just talk about your client that's considering it?
Well, I have a client who's blind, and it's really difficult with the nitrogen method. I mean, she's been blind for quite a while, and so is very comfortable operating in the world that way. And I think you guys might know there was a company called Escape Mode that was in Canada that had regulators, and they also had hoods and things that were available. And so we thought we could make it work with that. And then when that business closed down, her path became really much more difficult. And so something like Switzerland is just legally safer for those around her, for her to pursue that. You know, I think also, you know, we're not where we'd like to be with choice in dying. And I think for some family members, medical aid in dying, even if it's in Switzerland, just feels more comfortable than using inert gas. I think for some people find that a little scarier. So I think there's a number of reasons that people would choose to go to Switzerland rather than use inert gas. I mean, Brian, jump on in if you can think of others.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the other client that is a client of mine, and he has anxiety around putting a hood on his head. And he also has a condition that he would like to make sure he does not exit before his partner. And so they're considering going together. And so there's lots of, as Lowrey says, there's lots of circumstances. The woman who you'll see in our next magazine was 85, and she decided she was done and ready to die. She didn't think she could apply to us because of where she lived, and she may or may not have qualified. But there are just a lot of people who would think that going to Switzerland and being in Basel would be more interesting, and having somebody there to, you know, provide you with the sodium pentothal than it is to put a bag on your head. So I think to some degree, my friend, when somebody said it's so expensive, she said it's 2 months rent. And I think it puts it in perspective. So what we're hoping is that this will just be another alternative that some people will consider. And that's what we're really about, is making sure that people have a consideration. We're not trying to push the nitrogen method per se. What we're most interested in is giving people as many options and alternatives as possible.
Okay, Erica Polner had a question. Does Final Exit Network provide any support for writing a legally defensible advanced directive document?
Laura, you can take that one.
So I'm not entirely sure. In terms of general advanced directives, most of those are created based upon, you know, state laws, and there's usually a state sanctioned form. Advanced directives, this is one of those weird areas where technically you can write whatever you want as instructions for how you wish to be cared for, you know, should you be sick or debilitated. At a practical matter, if you want doctors and others to actually follow the instructions, using the state form is probably best. And then you can tack another sheet of paper onto that with some additional instructions, sort of describing your own particular wishes. And that's probably a good idea. What I'm wondering if maybe that question is about advanced directive supplements that are very specific to dementia, And, you know, there's a lot of interest in creating these supplemental advanced directives for dementia to instruct one's caregivers to withhold food and fluid when the dementia has progressed to a point where the person is no longer interested in eating, where they, you know, the normal self-care behaviors that we have get interrupted by dementia at some point. And you can instruct your caregivers or your healthcare representative to see that you're not fed under those circumstances. What Brian was saying earlier is that we don't yet know how well those directives are going to hold up in court. So we are interested, if there's a situation where somebody who has signed a dementia directive that says, I do not want to be given food or fluid when I reach an advanced stage of dementia, and if a residential care facility refuses to honor that, we would like to be able to step in and see if we could bring that to court and say, yeah, you have to honor this. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but.
Okay. So next question comes from William Squire, and I don't know what these initials, what the acronym stands for, but his question is, I've had ME/CFS for 30 years, progressively more debilitating. No FDA approved treatment for it, so not a lot of treatment over the years. What would I have to provide for approval with Exit? I don't necessarily want to tell the doctor I've been seeing the last 20 years about this.
Yeah. So we have, I can think of at least one application for chronic fatigue syndrome that we have accepted. These are difficult applications. This particular person did have a very strong history of, as I said, multiple attempts to diagnose and treat, including a stay at the Mayo Clinic. I don't think she had to tell anybody what she wanted her medical records for. Your medical records, you have legal right to your medical records. You don't have to give a reason why you want them. And often you don't have to interact with the doctor when you're requesting your medical records. If it's an office of any size, you would just ask the medical records department, say, hey, look, I want a copy of my medical records. So somebody in those shoes would probably have to go back a little bit to, as I said, to demonstrate attempts to treat, attempts to diagnose and treat. But it's probably not necessary to tell your doctor, and you probably don't want to. Even if the doctor's sympathetic, they are mandated reporters, and that can just be, it would put them in an awkward position, even if they were supportive. And if they weren't supportive, that they could make things ugly.
Would you excuse me? I just heard something that I might want to correct. The questioner says something about Exit. We're talking about Final Exit Network, the organization. And then there's the book, Final Exit. And then there's Exit International, which is Philip Nitschke's organization. And then there's Exit in Switzerland, a national organization that services Swiss citizens. So it may be a little confusing, but this is Final Exit Network that we're talking about today.
Great, thank you, Faye. Yes, and I was answering the question, just presuming that the question was about Final Exit Network. And if it was about the other organizations, then I don't know.
Yeah, they didn't specify
Okay.
in the question.
Okay, the next one would be, I would like to do an anatomical donation upon my passing. Will self-deliverance at home interfere with that process?
So certainly things like organ donation are not going to be possible, because my understanding is most organ donation, it needs to be fresh. Like, this is when death occurs in the hospital. They can basically keep the body alive, but say that you're dead and transfer organs. We do work with a number of people who have made arrangements to donate their body to science, to a local university. There are other programs for body donation. There shouldn't be any practical reason that there would be a problem. As I said, the air we breathe is nitrogen. The nitrogen doesn't do anything to the body. So there shouldn't be a problem, but I think a lot of those donation places usually have a clause that they can turn something down for any reason that they want to. And so some place might be squeamish and might choose not to. I usually advise clients that I'm working with, if they have a donation arrangement, I advise them to at least have a backup plan in mind, so that if their loved ones call and for whatever reason the donation place declines to take it, that they know what to do next.
Thank you. Next question comes from Karen Stewart, and it's actually kind of a three-part question. So how long do canisters stay good? What if the family helps with the equipment? And do police check for fingerprints?
Okay. So inert gas is as it's described, it's inert. It doesn't interact with anything. So it doesn't go bad. It doesn't go like rancid the way milk might go or something. We have had cases where the cylinder has leaked because there's a connection between the main cylinder and the valve. But if it's leaked and you put the regulator in and the pressure is 0, okay, you got to go get a full tank, but nobody's gotten hurt. What was the second question?
The second
How long
question
it'll
was,
last.
Fingerprints was the third.
what if the family helps with the equipment?
Yeah, so, you know, if family members support a loved one physically and ending their lives, that would be crossing legal lines. It's certainly not my business what loving family members do for one another. But if it's clear to us ahead of time that assistance is going to need to be provided, then we really can't be involved. But, you know, sometimes I've certainly had family members jump in and help, not because it was needed, but just because it seemed polite. And, you know, I make sure that everybody understands what the legal lines are, but it's not my business what, as I said, what loving family members do for one another. In terms of fingerprinting, I'm sure they could if they wanted to. It really depends whether or not there's an investigation.
And then the next one is, how is the equipment managed after death?
So, you know, typically people, you know, if the equipment's there, they have a note. We instruct people to leave some instructional material as well. Often the police will take the equipment. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, clients don't necessarily tell us exactly what happens afterwards, but I've certainly had clients where the spouse wanted that equipment because she wanted it for herself. So she sort of had to go down to the police station and kind of jump up and down a little bit. But at the end of the day, the equipment belonged to her spouse. Her spouse was deceased. She was the heir. The equipment belongs to her. I've also had clients where the spouse or loved one just doesn't want the equipment. And I think a lot of times if they don't ask, who knows what happens to it? It just disappears into the police cell or somewhere.
So the police generally take the equipment with them?
I think they sometimes do, yeah. Just in case, you know, it's their job to make sure there's no foul play. And a lot of times these situations are a little bit different than what they're used to seeing, right? It's the family members know that it was coming, there's the letter, there's the instructional material. You know, they just want to cover their bases. So I think they often take the equipment. Yeah.
If I could, I'd also like to make a comment. In a number of cases, clients will decide that they want to do this on their own and they don't want us to be there. And in some of those cases, we suspect that there may be, you know, somebody who would help a little bit and maybe remove the equipment or whatever. We don't know. But I do think that one of the options that people have when they get, after they've had the education visit, is they can decide they want to do this themselves with their family in any way they decide. And we always instruct them on what the legal implications are. But I, for one, at least, suspect that sometimes there is a little assistance at that point in time, but I have no knowledge of it.
And then we have a question, does the inert gas method ever fail?
Well, I'm not one, I never say never. But it's a very simple process. The things that go wrong tend to be like a tank that's leaked or if the regulator's broken, but these are all things that you know before you start. Certainly for us, anybody we've educated, any with exit guides being present, no, there has never been a failure. I did comb through a little bit of the forensic literature, seeing if I could dig up cases with failed attempts using inert gas. And there are a few, very few, and they are all cases of people who are relatively young who were discovered, like mid-process. And that, I think, is the biggest risk. If you're not in a safe, secure place and somebody comes across you, then yes, you could be interrupted. And if your brain has been without oxygen long enough, then damage could occur.
Next question comes from Beth Gibbons, and she asks, where can nitrogen be purchased?
Welding supply stores, industrial gas suppliers, things like that.
Loretta Salisbury asks, what if the 3 years of an applicant passes and they have not felt ready to exit? Are there any exceptions to still receiving help from the guide, even though it's after 3 years?
Well, people can certainly reapply, right? And as I said, it is not a difficult process. Personal statement, the medical records is probably the biggest pain, and then an interview. But it is fair to our guides that they have updated information. I mean, I can certainly see a situation where somebody's ready to exit and it's been 3 years and 6 months. I think that would be fine. But we have had situations where somebody who had a reasonably aggressive type of cancer, treatments actually worked really well. And 3 years later, the person was in full remission. You know, we have a responsibility to get updated medical records, because I could see a situation where that happened and then maybe he had a bad job episode a year later, decides to exit, and the guides are in the situation where they think they're supporting somebody with cancer when in fact that's not what's going on at all. So we do have a responsibility to make sure the situation is still what the application was for.
Colleen Fitzmaurice asks, are the senior guides volunteers?
Yes.
Sharon Sachs asks, how long does the nitrogen method take, and how can anyone be sure it's over and successful?
So typically death occurs in sort of the 8 to 15 minute window. People go unconscious the 30-second to minute window. It's a long minute, but that's still pretty fast. I'm not sure about the last one. I mean, when I'm with people and they've been without oxygen for 15 to 20 minutes, I guess I'm not too worried that they're dead. You know, the body cools, their color changes. You know, I'm not a physician. I'm not in there with a stethoscope, but I'm just watching, and you can sort of see it. And I don't know if Brian wants to jump in.
So all I would say is that if you leave the hood on, the gas runs out in about 20 minutes. If you have any doubt about it, you just leave the hood on for another 10 or 15 minutes and it's guaranteed.
Lowrey, if the body is found with the hood and the tank, is that considered suicide as the cause of death?
So technically the cause of death is asphyxiation and the manner of death would be suicide.
So that might impact insurance.
Not likely. Most life insurance policies, they have a contestability clause that's usually valid for 1 to 2 years. I think it varies by state. But anybody who's at the point where they're sick enough where they're going to be ending their life, they probably weren't picking up an insurance policy within the last 2 years. And if they were, they would legally have had to have disclosed any illness that they had. But somebody who got a life insurance policy 10 years ago, I don't think that, and I'm not an attorney or an insurance agent, but I don't think that's an issue.
Tom,
Reason do
that-
people prefer to have the equipment out of their of anybody's view when the authorities come, if the authorities come?
Well, as Brian said, I think that's happening less and less. The reasons that people wanted to hide choice in dying are really fading. Society is coming to a place where it really understands why people would make these choices. We're all seeing horrific endings. So more and more, it's just easier to leave the equipment and not alter the death scene. Because when you alter a death scene, at that point, you are probably crossing legal lines as well. So if you don't alter the death scene, then no legal lines have been crossed. You know, as Brian said, sometimes I'm sure people do, but it's not my business.
It's not to say that some people wouldn't prefer to have that done, because there still is a social stigma associated with suicide. There are a lot of people who think that people who end their life before they have to are either cowards or crazy, and many of the laws suggest that. And so I continually tell our clients how brave and courageous they are, but our social acceptability of people who want to hasten their death is still not there. Although I agree with Lowrey, it's changed drastically, even in the last 6 years that I've been there. But there's still a psychosocial issue of people not wanting to acknowledge that they committed suicide.
Next question comes from Tom Bettinger, who asks, do the senior guides support those who choose VSED or only those who choose the inert gas method?
So we certainly talk about VSED and we will provide information. The guide program does not provide logistical support or bedside companionship. Again, VSED just takes a long time, and that's not something we're prepared to physically support, to be present. But we do have resources, connections with doulas. Yeah, we absolutely want people to have their options. And especially when we're working with clients who have neurodegenerative issues or whose family is really uncomfortable, then VSED is a really good option. And we help people consider that and sort of get started down that path, but we don't usually walk the path with them.
Amy Garnica asks, sounds like so many people are involved in the decision making. How long does an application process take? And is there any appeal process if a person is rejected?
So how long it takes is really dependent on the diagnosis and the situation. I would say from application to exit, 4 to 6 weeks would be, get the application in, get it reviewed, start working with the guides. The guides have got to check things out. If it's a simple diagnosis, if your closest loved ones are all on board and you've had all these conversations, things can happen very, very fast. It's still going to be a matter of weeks and not days. But often we do find that the process, once people get into it and they get comfort with having control, they tend to take a lot longer than they indicated they wanted to in the application.
So Lowrey, I think a part of the question is that how long, can you explain how long it takes for the application to actually be approved by the medical evaluation committee? Because some of the time in the 3 to 4 weeks is the senior guide doing the calls and scheduling visits and things. So maybe you can address how long on average it takes from the time they make an application until it's approved.
Okay, yeah, sure. I don't actually have a mathematical average, but the MEC is typically pretty quick. A simple application will turn around in a few days. If it's a really close call or the diagnosis is particularly difficult, it could take a week or two, but that would be highly unusual. I would say almost always within a week and usually less than that for the MEC decision.
And then the appeal process.
Oh, thank you. I need help. So we don't have a formal appeal process, but certainly we have had people come back to the coordinator is the person who sort of shepherds applicants through the application process. And we have had situations where a person came back and said, hey, look, I'd really like to submit some more medical records. We've had people sort of reapply a year later. So that's another option. But we have had a few cases where people appealed and, we will almost always reconsider if somebody has some new medical records or the coordinator would like the committee to consider something else. It doesn't happen a lot, but yes, it's possible.
And I think about 90% or greater of all applications are approved. Is that not correct?
It is, but it's important to keep in mind that our coordinators, again, the people who are answering the calls, they're screening the applicants for would this person be appropriate. Our application process, as I said, is pretty simple. And at the same time, it is a reasonable amount of work, both for the applicant and for our coordinators. So there's a lot of screening that happens before the application process. But yes, 90 to 95% of applications are accepted.
So Chris Young asks, in California, the Secretary of State offers to record one's advance directive. What are the chances that the various medical/emergency entities would go online and find my advance directive?
I mean, I think they would only be doing that if they were looking, right? If there was something about the situation that indicated to the authorities that something was not as it seemed, or that there might have been foul play. But again, when the family has been educated, they knew this was coming. The paperwork is all there by the person. I'm not sure that the cops have anything better to do with their time than go digging around to see if the person has an advance directive. I'd be very surprised. Yeah.
Leonard Levinson asks, how racially diverse is FEN? He's a life member and senses that FEN could work better, I believe, to reach out to people of color.
Mhm.
I guess that's a comment.
And it's a fair one. The demographic at Final Exit Network is very similar to what you see in medical aid and dying. Tends to be highly educated, middle to upper class, and largely white, although not entirely. We do track a little bit. We try to track our clients and see. We would love to be available to anybody who wants us, but it is difficult. I mean, given what we do, especially, we have to be very careful about reaching out to disadvantaged communities and saying, hey, if you want to die, here we are. Obviously you can see that wouldn't go over so well. So if people have ideas, we would love to hear them, because we would love to be available to all communities and would love to be able to do that carefully.
The next question is from Leanne McDougall, and she's asking, what telephone number do I call when ready to ask for verbal help from FEN with ending my life? And Leanne, I can let you know that at the end of this presentation, when we're through some more questions, we will be putting up contact information for Final Exit Network. So you'll have that information.
Okay, so this is a question, but I'm not sure. Could you talk about the options of palliative terminal sedation and VSED? Does FEN help with those options also? And I think you've already answered that no, but you will help them make it available, that they know about these.
Yeah, we'll support them and help them think about it, but that's not our area of expertise. And there are people who would be better at supporting you with that than we would be.
And I would just comment that it is true that a person, if they are in hospice, can ask for as much morphine as they want, and there's nothing illegal about a person providing them enough morphine until they die, as long as the person is requesting it. So there are a number of those kind of deaths that occur every day in hospice, where people understand that it is legal to request this, and it's legal for the doctor or the hospice nurse to give you that. And it's another option that I think I would be surprised if there weren't a large number of people that are dying every day using that particular method.
We don't know how many or how often or for what reason. And it's justified under the principle of double effect. That is, the first principle is to relieve suffering, and incidentally, it happens to cause death.
Right. Thank you.
So the next question is, with the nitrogen canisters, are they calibrated so that you know if it leaks or not?
Well, you need a regulator, and all regulators have a pressure gauge. So
Barbara Howell asks, what might typically trigger an investigation? That's an answer.
Yeah, once we started working with family members, it doesn't seem to come up. There would have to be something that made the responding officers feel like something was amiss.
I would just add that in the days when some of the guides would remove equipment, there was potential for some sort of an investigation, because there might be a question about, why did this person die now? The doctor didn't think they were ready. So I think when the equipment is left, I don't think there's much of an issue, and I don't think there's much of an opportunity for any kind of investigation, especially if the family is fully aware and on board. But we did see lots more of that when people were removing the equipment, because then you had to explain why this person died when they did.
Next questions come from Rose Grisham, and she's asking, is it typical for the police to be involved after the passing? Is a coroner called to declare death?
Yes, when it is a chosen death, then it becomes a case for the coroner. They need to, again, make sure that, the person wasn't drugged. But, the people who might otherwise typically sign a death certificate, such as the family doctor or the hospice doctor, obviously, when the equipment is there, the cause of death was not the underlying cancer. The cause of death was not the underlying heart condition. So yes, the coroner or medical examiner would need to sign the death certificate.
And I think it's fair to add that when people leave the equipment, they do call in the detectives, because one of the obligations of the state is to make sure that nobody has killed this person. And so they try to come in to ascertain whether or not anybody has, you know, supported, assisted, or forced this person to do this. So there is some level of that also.
Kay Cofield asks, what reasonable answers might one give when purchasing a canister of nitrogen if asked?
Mhm. Nitrogen is actually used for a bunch of things. People who really care about energy efficiency will fill their car tires with gas, with nitrogen. I guess it doesn't expand or contract as much. I think some people who race bicycles, you can always say that it's for your niece who races bicycles. It is used for food preservation, although that would be food grade, which is a little more expensive, but it's fine. But usually if you walk in like you know what you're doing, you own the place, nobody asks you, but it's good to have an answer.
Our own Barry Price asks, can you describe typical responses by someone who uses the nitrogen method? I'm not sure. Barry, you may have to expound on that. I'm not sure I know what you were.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question.
I was talking about physical responses. I mean, if somebody takes nitrogen and guys using nitrogen, are there some common physiological kinds of reactions that you see in a person who's taken nitrogen?
Oh, yes, thank you. So typically, as I said, somebody goes unconscious in the 30 seconds to minute window. The part of the brain that controls movement is very quickly affected by a lack of oxygen. And so it's quite common for us to see right after somebody goes unconscious and for a little bit after, sort of involuntary muscle contractions, which can look a little bit weird. Definitely be prepared if you're accompanying anybody who is ending their life this way. You're going to see, you may well see some of these movements. And if you don't know they're coming, it would be disturbing. But if you know they're coming, you understand where they're coming from. You'll also get gasping sounds and things, because as I said, it does take 8 to 15 minutes for the body to die. And sometimes the breathing will stop and then restart. So yes, there are movements and things like that.
And is Gary, sorry, Gary, is FEN researching any other methods other than the nitrogen method?
Not at the moment. We certainly keep our ear to the ground, and we were looking at doing some research on sodium nitrite. But then with the Amazon lawsuit and some of the other stuff that was going on, we sort of came to the realization that it probably wasn't going to be available all that much longer. And so taking the risk of doing research on a newer method when it was only going to be available for a few more years didn't seem like it made sense. So we keep our ear to the ground, and if other stuff comes up, we definitely want to know about it. But we're not actively doing research at the moment.
Leanne McDougall is just wondering for some clarification on what authorities are to be called after the death.
You know, typically that the loved ones just call 911. We have found that when they call the police non-emergency number and say, hey, my loved one has chosen to end their life, the non-emergency number just kicks it over to 911 anyway. So you can do your best and say, look, don't come, sirens blaring, the person's clearly dead. At the end of the day, they're going to do what they're going to do. But 911 seems to just be the simplest path.
And there was a question I didn't know the answer to. Will the inert gas be identifiable during the autopsy?
Depends, A, which gas you use.
Okay, so nitrogen probably would be my guess, since that's what we're talking about.
I think that would be very difficult because, as I said, the air we breathe is 78.8% nitrogen. Now, look, if somebody's president of the United States and they are combing over the body, doing whatever high-end forensics they have, there may be ways to determine that the cause of death was asphyxiation. I mean, I think there are little, like you can get tiny blood vessels bursting, petechiae, somebody jump in. But at a base level for any ordinary department medical examiner, no, not to my knowledge.
I think it's petechiae.
Petechiae, thank you. Glad someone could speak Latin.
4 semesters does it.
Nice.
Darren Sachs asks, if dementia is already in progress, when is it too late to initiate a request for help?
Dementia's tough. From the guide program perspective, as I said, you have to have decisional capacity. It's a relatively low bar. You have to understand your situation. You have to understand the options that are available to you. And you have to understand the consequences of choosing one of those paths. And so if we are working with somebody with dementia, we'll check and make sure they understand those steps before we work with them at the education visit, and obviously before the exit. As a practical matter, and this is not, I'm not talking from data, or this is just my impression, that self-awareness is actually a higher order function, I think. And again, this is just Lowrey talking, but when I watch people, it does seem as though their awareness of how much they have declined actually goes first. And so people miss their window of opportunity, not because they've lost their competence window, but because they have sort of lost some of their awareness of how far they've slipped. Brian, do you want to jump in? You've worked with people with
I would
dementia.
just say that another issue with dementia is that almost every case is different, and a lot of people will come in and out. I've had dementia cases where the person was perfectly in tune with me, talking to me, and after the person died, the wife said, last night he didn't know who his daughter was. And so it's very hard. But as Lowrey says, we have a protocol that we use at the time to make sure that we feel comfortable that they understand what their options are and they understand the consequences of their decision. And that's about all we can do at this point.
Bill Simmons asks if it isn't a good idea to have a smartphone video taken while somebody is doing this.
Certainly there's good arguments for it. It creeps me out a little bit, frankly. And I do feel in the modern world and the way social media is and the way the tiniest things are misrepresented, I just feel like video clips of people ending their lives would not help promote rational discussion around choice and dying, and could actually do some damage to the movement. And I just don't know if someone who's really opposed could somehow use a video and turn it on its head and suggest that assistance had been provided, or it's not a bad idea, but it makes me uneasy.
Marcia Hoffer asks, assisting a person to die is a felony in California and can be prosecuted. How do the authorities know that there hasn't been assistance if family members have been present?
I mean, I think in order to prosecute somebody, you need evidence, and that would be positive evidence that assistance was provided. And if it wasn't provided, there shouldn't be any evidence. Doesn't mean you can't get hassled, but they have the obligation to prove that you did, not the other way around. At least that's my understanding of how criminal cases work.
So Julie asks, was helium used in the past? And if so, is that still an option?
Yes, helium was used in the past. It is still an option. It's just that getting pure helium has gotten a little bit more difficult. You can't use the little Walmart balloon kits anymore. And it is a little bit more expensive. So at this point, if you have to go to an industrial supplier anyway, you might as well get nitrogen, which is cheaper.
I think you've already answered this, but just in case, Nancy Walker's asking, if equipment is left and the medical examiner or coroner certifies cause of death, do insurance companies refuse to pay if the coroner's verbiage includes the word suicide?
Yeah, so I think this comes back to that question that was asked earlier. I'm assuming the term is life insurance. It's about life insurance policies.
Yes.
And the contestability clauses are typically only a year or two long. And so if anybody's taking out life insurance within a year or two of ending their life because of a serious illness, that is highly unlikely because you have to disclose any illnesses when you apply for life insurance. But if someone's had a life insurance policy and the contestability clause is over, it shouldn't be an issue. But, again, I'm not a lawyer or an insurance agent, but that's my understanding.
So Kelly from New Jersey is asking, what is the role of a volunteer at the very end? Do they just come to your house and watch and then leave?
Yeah, so we come, we talk to people, we sit with them. I've watched Saturday Night Live, Prince's last performance with a client before she exited. Like, you know, we're there to be with the client, to celebrate or just to be next to them, provide them comfort. Some people like us to be right next to them. Some people just want us a little ways away. Really depends on what the client wants, but yeah.
And I would add that I think a number of clients want us there to make sure they die. I think that regardless of everything we say, I think that a lot of them would like us there to make sure that they don't screw up and that it works and that they're going to die.
Yeah, I mean, we're absolutely there. We'll talk to the person and review the steps and make sure they're safe as best we can. We just can't provide any assistance.
I just
Gisela asks, go ahead, Faye.
just from Caring Friends experience, the only reason that was be an investigation is because the person would have been incapable to do this themselves and must have required help. That is, they were so infirmed or debilitated. Have you ever had that experience?
Not to my knowledge. That hasn't prompted any kind of investigation that I'm aware of. Brian, are you aware of a case that?
No, but we've had situations where, and I think your client who's blind is a good example of one where it's a concern and where, you know, there is a question about could this person have really done all the things, and that's why I say we try to avoid those. And if we get to a particular place, we'll say that we can't be there. If you decide you want to do something on your own, then that's your option. But you're right. If they have a physical issue, then that's a suspicious thing that will raise the ire of the police when they come, and it will cause some issues.
So do it early before you're so debilitated.
Absolutely.
So Barry Price has another question. Which family members have to be on board in order for FEN to assist? Can a single sibling opposed to this block the assistance?
Well, coming back to our legal discussion, we definitely don't assist, but we do educate. And, you know, if there is a close loved one, like a sibling who is really rabidly opposed, that would be tough for Final Exit Network. We have gotten, I know Brian has gotten a letter from a client's children. It was basically a cease and desist letter that said, look, if you continue to educate our mother, we will sue and call the cops. And, you know, in this country, unfortunately, anybody can sue for anything. And while we, as I said, as individuals and as an organization, we absolutely support people's right to their own life, but we also have to consider the safety of the guides in the organization. And if there's someone who's likely to sue, then we have to take that into consideration, which is unfortunate, but we do.
And this is a good opportunity for me to say that one of the most important messages we can give to all of you is talk to your family and friends about how you feel about this, and start early and continue forever, because getting your family on board is the best way to assure that you have control of your end days.
Amen.
Gisela asks, what if you don't have anyone to call 911? If you live alone, will the guide do that, or what other plan would work?
So as I said, the guides don't do anything.
That's not true.
Okay, we talk a lot. There's usually somebody. People can be pretty creative. I had one client who convinced her Pilates teacher that this would be a good idea. Once he warmed up, he was great. I did have one person who was very, very isolated. And what she did was she wrote a letter to the local sheriff's department and put it in the mailbox the night she decided to exit so that it wouldn't be picked up until the next day. So you can do something like that.
We also had a client who got one of the medical alert buttons. You can buy those for a monthly thing, and if they call you and you don't answer, they'll bring somebody in, and that's another thing that people have done. Those little medical alert things you wear around your neck.
So it is 3 o'clock, Barry and Faye.
So we're wrapping up questions. We just have a couple of more, but shall we, Lowry, would you like to screen share the contact information?
Thank you. Yes.
And I think really there's just one more question. Oh, and this is a pretty good one to wrap up. Would it be good to leave a handwritten note clearly stating you acted independently and there is no danger from the nitrogen tank?
So excellent. Yes. And we absolutely have clients leave a final letter next to them and usually leave like a copy of Final Exit or a printout of chapter 22 or the Peaceful Pill Handbook. We also advise that people leave some ID of some form or another. And I've already forgotten the second half of that question.
Well, no, I think you covered it, but then kind of going into that, should they leave? Because somebody asked, what if I have a prepaid cremation and are told to contact the mortuary upon death? Or should they leave that written information as well? Or should a family member or loved one be in charge of taking that step?
Well, certainly somebody needs to notify the funeral home or the crematorium. People will often leave that information there. It just makes sense. Again, it shows a well-planned exit, right? If the police then see everything's all there, but usually the family member or whoever is going to be taking care of the situation would also have that information. But it's a good idea. Why not leave it next to you?
I would also comment that the real issue is you need to get a death certificate. And if you leave the equipment, it inevitably will mean that it's going to go to the coroner to get the death certificate. You won't go directly to the funeral home because they can't sign the death certificate under this condition, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think funeral homes typically do that anyway. I think the funeral home needs the death certificate in order to do whatever they do. But again, we're in medical examiner territory, and that's not my strong point. So.
But it can look like a natural death if the equipment is removed. Yes?
It can. At which point, don't leave a letter for obvious reasons.
I think we're good. You guys were wonderful.
Hey, I want to just personally thank everybody for all the good questions and for listening. And this is wonderful. I wish we had people all over the country that were interested in this. So thank you very much, Barry. Thank you, Faye. This was wonderful for us too.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Such an involved and interested group. Thank you for your attention for this long. We really appreciate it.
They'll be able to see it on our website, hemlocksocietysandiego.org.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation and we learned a lot. And we really appreciate you taking the time to help educate us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, folks, I guess that's it for the July 2023 Hemlock Society of San Diego meeting. We'll look forward to seeing you again in a month at the very latest to see our film and then 2 months from now to see our program on hospice.
And our lunch.
And our lunch, if you can come. All that, again, you can find at our website, hemlocksocietysandiego.org. Take care to all. Bye-bye.